I mentioned my brother's wedding at a family dinner. Yes, just a casual remark. And in that moment the entire table froze. All eyes turned to me, but no one reacted more strangely than my aunt. She set down her glass of wine slowly, looked straight at me, and said something so chilling that I actually thought I'd just triggered a secret my family had been trying to hide for years. It not only changed the course of that meal, but it also shook the image of my family that I thought I knew. There are some words that after you hear them, you can never unhear them again, and my aunt's words were exactly that. Welcome to Judgy Tales, where we explore the most thrilling, dramatic, and controversial real-life stories from every corner of Reddit. Here we not only read but also react, analyze, and, of course, judge. Because who doesn't love a little family drama, secrets revealed, or moments that make the listener exclaim, "What the hell is this?" In today's video, you will hear a seemingly simple story. A sister is just sharing the joy of her brother's wedding. But then, every word her aunt utters evokes a buried past, simmering grudges, and a decision that could change the way she views her family. What makes an aunt, who has always been supportive and loving to her niece, become so cold and cruel just because of a mention of a wedding? Is this a spur-of-the-moment reaction, or the result of a chain of events that the main character never knew about? This story will not only keep you on the edge of your seat, but will also make you wonder. In every family, how many secrets are hidden behind smiles and friendly meals? And what happens when a secret suddenly comes out? Not because someone intentionally revealed it, but because of a simple statement. Brace yourself, because the story ahead will make you rethink the simplest things. And if you love dramatic twists and turns from real life, then you have come to the right place. This is Judgy Tales, real stories, real drama, real judgments. Let's get started. I grew up in a family that wasn't exactly the model happy family, but it wasn't as chaotic as a TV series. We were the kind of family where everything seemed fine, as long as you didn't ask too many questions. I'm 27, female, and the youngest of the three, with a brother named Daniel, who is 4 years older than me. Since childhood, Daniel has always been a calm, responsible person, and perhaps that's why he's always been considered the pride of the family. As for me, I was often called too sensitive, asking too many questions, and not knowing when to talk. My parents divorced when I was in middle school, but things weren't too stressful. My dad moved away, my mom raised my brother and me, and during those years my Aunt Margaret, my mom's younger sister, was the person in my life most often besides my mom and Daniel. Aunt Margaret didn't have any children, never married, and always said that I was more like her than my mom. She would come to visit on weekends, take me out, buy me books, and was the only person in the family who actually listened patiently to my weird thoughts about the world. My relationship with Aunt Margaret was very close, but what I didn't realize until later was, she was close to me, but never to Daniel. She even avoided mentioning him in conversation. I used to think it was just because Daniel was too busy, or maybe because they didn't have much in common. But clearly something was wrong. As for my mother, she was a strong woman who had sacrificed a lot to raise her 2 children after her divorce. However, she was also the type of person who never wanted to dig up the past. Whenever I asked her about her past or about her relationship with Aunt Margaret, she would say something like, "It's nothing to talk about, son," or, "That's in the past, don't bring it up again." Daniel, as usual, didn't care much about those details. He was outgoing, energetic, had a steady job early on, and had recently gotten engaged to his longtime girlfriend, a sweet girl named Leah. Leah was beloved by my family, especially my mother. Their upcoming wedding was considered a big deal, not only because Daniel was the eldest, but also because it would be the first time since my parents' divorce that the whole family would be together for such a big occasion. I was so excited. For me, a wedding was more than just a beautiful party. It was also an opportunity for everyone to come together, for the unspoken rifts in our family to be mended, or at least softened. I had prepared the invitations, helped Leah with the decoration plans, and even planned a touching speech to deliver at the party. Everything seemed to be going perfectly. Then one evening my family gathered for dinner. It was nothing special, just another weekend. There was my mother, my Aunt Margaret, me, and a distant relative I didn't see often. While everyone was chatting about work and the weather, I casually mentioned Daniel's wedding. The words were so casual. Daniel and Leah are choosing a wedding cake, and I heard they're going for a 3-tiered vintage-style one, which is really cute. Before I could finish my sentence, the atmosphere around the table seemed to sink. Aunt Margaret stopped picking at her food, her eyes fixed on me. No one laughed. No one said anything. My mother turned away, pretending to pour more water, but her hands were shaking so much she almost spilled the pitcher. And then Aunt Margaret said something. Just something. But it sent a chill down my spine. She said it, her voice low and slow. There are people who shouldn't get married and there are weddings that shouldn't be held. No one laughed. No one asked back. The words hung in the air like a sharp knife. I stammered, "Auntie, what do you mean?" But she just looked at me, her eyes filled with sadness and anger, then stood up and left the table. That night I couldn't sleep. Why did she react like that? She had always been nice to me, so why did she seem resentful when I mentioned my brother? Was there a secret between Aunt Margaret and Daniel? Or was it something about my parents that I had never known? That was the moment I realized. My family was not as simple as I thought. The ambiguous words, the averted looks, and now Aunt Margaret's strange reaction, all indicated that behind that calm exterior was something deeply buried. And I, unwittingly, dug it up. I couldn't get Aunt Margaret's words out of my head. There are people who shouldn't get married and there are weddings that shouldn't be held. It wasn't a line said in frustration. It was said as a warning, as if some moral line had been crossed, and Daniel's wedding was proof of that. I couldn't sleep that night. Images swirled in my head. My aunt's eyes, my mother's shaking hands, the sudden heaviness that had settled over the usually intimate family dinner. I lay awake until morning, and at some point I decided I had to find out. I couldn't walk into my brother's wedding feeling this uneasy. I started with my mother. The next morning, when we were alone in the kitchen, I asked her directly, "What happened last night? Does Aunt Margaret hate Daniel?" My mother didn't answer right away. She continued wiping the counter, then opened the refrigerator as if searching for something important. But her eyes weren't really looking at anything. I repeated the question more seriously this time. My mother turned, put the napkin down on the table and looked straight at me. "You don't need to know," she said. "It's none of your business." But that alone confirmed that something was being hidden. And if it was serious enough that she didn't want me to know, it had to be about me, about Daniel, about this family. I started looking the only way I knew how, asking outsiders. I went to see Aunt Margaret. I asked her out for lunch. She agreed, but she was clearly still angry about something. She was cold, avoided eye contact, and kept checking her phone. I tried to make conversation gently, asking about work, about her cat, then slowly moved on to the previous night's dinner. "Auntie," I said slowly, "I can't stop thinking about what you said that day. What did you mean when you said there were weddings that shouldn't happen?" Auntie Margaret sighed. She looked at me for a long moment as if considering whether to tell the truth. Then she lowered her voice and said something I'll never forget. "You think Daniel is your real brother?" I was stunned. She continued, "Daniel is not your mother's real son. And this wedding, it would be a terrible mistake if you didn't know the truth." Everything inside me fell apart. I couldn't understand it. Daniel and I had grown up together, called our mother mother, lived under the same roof. It couldn't be. "What are you talking about? What do you mean he's not your real brother? Who is Daniel?" She told me in a deep voice that made each word seem suffocating. That more than 30 years ago my mother had a close friend, a woman named Claire. They grew up together almost like sisters. Claire had gotten pregnant when she was 20, and her boyfriend had dumped her. Her family was too strict and conservative, and they wanted to disown her if she kept the baby. In her desperation, Claire went to my mother. And my mother, who was not married at the time and was still in a relationship with my father, agreed to something crazy, to adopt the baby. Not just to help temporarily, but to adopt her as her own, on the condition that Claire would disappear, never ask for the baby back, and that the matter would remain a secret forever. That baby was Daniel. Aunt Margaret knew all about it from the beginning, because she had overheard the conversation between my mother and Claire at the time. But she kept quiet, out of love, out of trust, or simply because she thought there would never be anything to worry about. But then everything changed when Daniel started dating Leah. Aunt Margaret knew Claire. She'd seen Leah in a photo my mother had hidden away years ago. And then the unthinkable happened. Leah was Daniel's half-sister. Claire, after aborting her first child, Daniel had gotten married, had another child, Leah, and left town. Which meant, if Daniel married Leah, it would be a marriage between a brother and a half-sister. I felt sick. My head was spinning. Everything I thought I knew about my family, about my childhood, about the intimate moments between us, was now distorted, warped. How could I face Daniel? My mother? Leah? I asked my aunt, "Why did you say it now? Why didn't you stop the wedding?" She choked up, "I warned your mother. Many times. But she thought if the truth was buried deep enough, it would never surface. She thought Leah was just a normal girl that Daniel met. But as soon as I saw Leah, I knew. She had the same eyes as Claire." I left the cafe in an indescribable state of shock. I felt like I was carrying a bomb on my shoulders that only I knew was ticking. I had to tell someone. But I also knew that one wrong word at this moment could destroy an entire family. I faced my mother that night. I didn't beat around the bush. I just said, "I know. About Daniel. About Claire. About Leah." My mother was speechless. She sat down in a chair, her hands shaking, tears streaming down her face, unable to say a word. After a long, heavy silence, she simply said, "I thought this would never happen. I did everything I could to protect you. But maybe I was wrong." The climax came not from the scream but from the silence. I didn't cry. I wasn't angry. I just felt empty. Daniel didn't know. Leah didn't know. The wedding was still planned. I carried the truth like a curse. I was stuck between two paths. One was to keep quiet so as not to destroy everything, the other was to speak out, and let the pieces fall apart in ways no one could have predicted. I left Aunt Margaret's house with cold hands and a dizzy head. Her words were like a knife stabbing straight into my heart. "If you knew the truth about that wedding, you would never let it happen." And then she let out a truth I had never imagined. Daniel and Leah were half-siblings. I couldn't breathe when I heard those words. It shattered all the happy, warm images of our childhood. Every celebration, every smile, every hug in the family now had a horrible color that I couldn't wash away. But what shook me the most was my mother's silence all these years. He knew. She knew everything. I didn't know where to start, but I knew I couldn't let that wedding go on as if everything was normal. Nor could I simply run down the aisle screaming, "They're brothers," like in the cheap movies. I needed a plan. A way to bring the truth to light, but without pushing the family into an abyss beyond repair. A way to protect Daniel and Leah from themselves, from the destruction of an adult-created family tragedy. I started by going back to the old house where my mother kept all the family papers, letters, and medical records. I had to be stealthy because if my mother knew I was digging into the past, she would do everything she could to stop me. In an old wooden box hidden under a closet, I found yellowing handwritten letters. One of them was from a woman named Claire, sent to my mother more than 20 years ago. The handwriting was soft but shaky. "Thank you for keeping your word. If Daniel is okay, I'm satisfied. I can't stay, but I will never forget my son." I was stunned. Claire, the biological mother of Daniel and Leah? I needed to know more. I found an old photograph of Claire standing next to a strange man, holding a baby I recognized as Daniel. But how could I confirm that Leah was her daughter too? I needed proof, something no one could deny. A DNA test. I followed the address left on the envelope. It was a small coastal town where Claire had lived in seclusion, away from the world after giving her child up for adoption. I drove for 6 hours with 100 thoughts racing through my head. What if she refused to see me? What if it was all a misunderstanding? But Claire opened the door. She looked at me stunned. "You are?" she asked, her voice trembling. I introduced myself, and when I mentioned Daniel, her eyes welled up. We sat together in the tiny kitchen, where the smell of chamomile tea and painful memories filled the air. She told me that Daniel was the result of a whirlwind romance with a married man. When she became pregnant with Leah, she was kicked out of her home and could not support both children. My mother adopted Daniel, and Leah was taken away by a foster care organization. But strangely, Leah appeared in my family later when my grandmother died and my mother adopted her. Did she know who Leah was? Or was it fate? Claire agreed to do a DNA test. I sent the sample to a reputable lab and waited in endless anxiety. 3 weeks later, I held the results in my hands. Daniel and Leah were half-siblings. There was no denying it. My world was shattered a second time. I imagined the moment the two of them stood on the altar, making sacred vows to each other, while the truth was, they shared the same blood. I knew that if I told them the truth directly, they would not believe me. They would think I was jealous or crazy. I needed a way for them to find out for themselves. A plan that was indirect but strong enough to make them confront me. I started by printing out the DNA results anonymously. I sent one to Daniel, one to Leah with a note. Before you marry, make sure you know who you are marrying. I also sent an anonymous letter to my mother, which read, "The truth always has a way of rising out of the mud. Do you want to be the one to tell it, or will someone else do it?" Everything after that was like a time bomb. Daniel called me in the middle of the night, panicked. "Someone sent me this. Is it real? Do you know?" I was silent for a moment, then said, "I didn't send it. But if you doubt it, get tested. See for yourself." 3 days later, Daniel told me that he and Leah had postponed their wedding. They wanted to take a break. I knew what that meant. My mother called me, sobbing, begging me not to do anything crazy. I asked her one question, "Did you know?" And she hung up. Aunt Margaret was the only person with me. She didn't seem happy, just quietly said, "The truth is hard to hear. But it's better than a lie for life." Daniel and Leah later got their own test, and the results confirmed the horror I already knew. They both disappeared from social media. The engagement was broken. My family became the subject of gossip for months. I don't call it revenge. I call it a necessary act. A painful attempt to save two people I loved from a mistake that could not be reversed. I lost my mother's trust. I became a saboteur in the eyes of some of my relatives. But I knew deep down that I had done the right thing. Not all truths are liberating. But silence always leads to destruction. This was the plan. This was the choice. And I accepted the consequences of it. After that fateful night when I revealed the whole truth about my aunt to the whole family, the atmosphere in the house changed completely. There were no more warm gatherings, no more cheerful laughter in the living room like before. Everything became cold, heavy, as if a thick layer of truth had covered all the previous illusions. Aunt Margaret, who was once respected by everyone, disappeared from my family's life after only a few days. Not a word of farewell, not a message, not a trace. She quietly disappeared, leaving behind the bewilderment of those who once loved her blindly. I heard that she moved to another state, cutting off contact with most of her relatives. That was probably the only reaction she could have after what I revealed. But the aftermath of the incident did not stop there. My family fell into a crisis of confidence. My mother cried for days, not because she was angry, but because she could not understand how a sister could be so cruel to her own children. My father, who was usually quiet, suddenly became more assertive. He began to actively protect me, speaking up for me in front of relatives. It seemed like he felt guilty for not noticing the unusual signs many years ago. My brother's wedding, the one at the center of all the conflicts, did not go as planned. After the incident, he called me aside to talk. It was a conversation I will never forget. "Did you really do that?" he asked, his voice hoarse with emotion. I nodded, saying nothing. I did not expect praise or forgiveness. I just wanted to look him straight in the eye, to show him that I was no longer the weak, resigned little sister. "Why?" he repeated. "Because no one stood up for me. And because you deserve to know the truth before you marry someone who lives in the shadow of a lie," I replied, trying to keep my voice even. He was silent for a long time. Then he bowed his head. "Thank you," he said softly. Those 2 words, just 2 short words, made me cry. All the anger, the hurt, the effort I had put in all this time burst out in that moment. The wedding was postponed indefinitely. Not because I had ruined it, but because my brother had realized he needed time to think things through. As for me, I didn't feel victorious. There was no moment of celebration, no applause, no praise. Just a deep sense of relief. A sense that I had finally stood up for myself and no longer let others define my worth. I returned to my daily life, but not the same person. I became more confident, more grounded, and especially more sober in my family relationships. I began to share my story privately as a reminder to others that sometimes it is the people we love who hurt us the most, and who we need to learn to face with courage. Family members who had previously doubted or blamed me gradually came back with awkward apologies. Some emailed, some called, some just looked at me longer when we met as a way of saying they understood. I don't blame them anymore. It takes time for everyone to see the truth, especially when that truth shatters the oldest beliefs. And the bride, my soon-to-be sister-in-law, had a reaction I didn't expect. A month after all this, she asked me out for coffee. I was a little hesitant, but I agreed. She looked at me and said, "I hate the way things turned out. But I know you're not lying. And honestly, I'm glad I found out before it was too late." We didn't become friends, but there was a quiet respect between us. She broke up with my brother not long after, saying that we both needed to grow up before we thought about starting a family. I think it was the right decision. And then one day, as I sat down to write in my diary, a new habit after all the turmoil, I asked myself, was it worth it? Was it worth it to shake things up, to have someone disappear, to have a family fall apart in an instant? The answer came to me not in words but in feeling. A sense of peace I'd never felt before. I no longer dream of crying alone in my room. I no longer feel small in the face of my aunt's sarcasm. I've reclaimed my voice, and for me that's always been worth it. In the end, I wasn't the one who changed everything. I was just the first one to speak out. The truth has the power to shatter everything. And if there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's this. Sometimes you have to let go of the brokenness in order to rebuild something more real, more beautiful, and more true. What do you think of this story? Was I being too cruel, or was it necessary? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you like stories like this, real stories, real drama, and real judgments, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because at Judgy Tales, you don't just listen to stories. You're part of the story. So, it all happened in a whirlwind that no one could have predicted. A careless remark about her brother's wedding led to the revelation of a long-buried family secret. And then, everything changed forever. But now it's your turn. What do you think about how it all happened? The aunt's actions in the story. Was it unresolved pain, simmering jealousy, or simply an uncontrollable outburst of emotion? Do you think the main character did the right thing by continuing to dig into the past after that cold remark? Should the past be left alone, or are there secrets that must be brought to light, even if the price could be the destruction of an entire family? Sometimes, in our quest for the truth, we not only face others but also ourselves. And what about the family's reaction after everything was revealed? Do you think they reacted fairly? Or are they just trying to maintain a false sense of security, rather than confronting responsibility and the truth? If you were in the situation, what would you do? Forgive and forget? Or cut it off and move on? We really want to hear from you, because Judgy Tales is not just a place to tell shocking stories, but also a place where people can listen, judge, and share their views. Have you ever been in a similar situation? A family secret suddenly revealed, a loved one overreacting, or a difficult choice between silence and the truth? Don't hesitate, leave a comment below. We read them all, and we love to see different perspectives from the community. Because in every story, whether one side is right or wrong, the listener's perspective is always the most important part. And who knows, your story might help someone else understand something in their own life. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for sticking with Judgy Tales through this emotional journey. We know that every minute you spend listening is a trust, and we truly appreciate it. If you found this story interesting, thought-provoking, or simply made you exclaim, "I can't believe this," don't forget to give it a like to support the channel. And if this is your first time visiting Judgy Tales, welcome to our place where we tell the most dramatic, emotional, and controversial stories on Reddit. Each week we bring you family feuds, shocking confessions, toxic relationships exposed, and situations that make you wonder, what would I do? Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Trust me, you won't want to miss the next episode, because the drama never really stops. Also, if you have a story of your own, a time you were betrayed, a time you were unfairly criticized, a time you witnessed a crazy family twist, don't hesitate to share it with us. Who knows, you might be the main character in the next Judgy Tales video. Thanks for listening. See you in the next one. And as always, listen, judge, and don't be afraid to voice your opinion. This is Judgy Tales, where other people's stories are lessons and emotions for all of us.